Good evening. I'm Kelly Wright. Thanks for joining me as we spend the next hour together. As always, I am hoping that you're safe and well, taking care of yourself and your family because you matter. Coming up tonight, my interview with San Francisco's Mayor, London Breed. She is an African-American woman who is a leader on the rise, not only in the city of San Francisco or the state of California, but nationwide. Tonight, she'll talk to us about how her city is faring during the COVID-19 pandemic, also what they're doing about police reform and healing the racial divide. In addition to that, she'll share with us her inspiring story of being a woman who grew up in public housing only to emerge as the leader she's become today. That's coming up in tonight's broadcast. But first, my opening observations. Heartbreak yet again for Black Americans who have suffered the loss of another Black man shot dead by a white police officer. Jonathan Price was a physical trainer, a fitness trainer. He saw a dispute going on, a domestic dispute, and tried to intervene to bring peace to the situation. Instead, a white police officer ended up shooting him dead. And now, Wolf City Police Officer Sean Lucas is charged with murder. The Texas Rangers said that his deadly force against Price was not objectively reasonable. Furthermore, as we continue to watch this sadness unfold for the family of Jonathan Price, one can only question and wonder, how long must this go on? How many more Black lives will not matter? And those are my opening observations as we hear now from the mother of Jonathan Price.
My son didn't deserve this. He really didn't. He helped everybody in this community and had a big heart and a spirit. Whatever he wants to strive for, he try to get out there and do it. But he didn't have to shoot him. I know they was trained to do more than just, tasing and shoot, and with him being up against each other, they could have wrestled or whatever, but they didn't. He turned around and shot him close up. That's why I say he did deserve that. He really did.
And so we see another Black man gunned down in Texas, and the Texas Rangers stepping in to charge the police officer responsible for the shooting death of Jonathan Price, a physical trainer, a man who was doing service to the community by stepping in to be a peacemaker to break up a domestic dispute going on. The questions remain as to why that police officer opened fire on an unarmed Black man yet again. And to join me now to talk about the legal ramifications and what we should be looking for in this case is Timothy Allen Simon, an attorney. He's also the chairman of the Black Chamber of Commerce in California. He's the chairman of the board of directors there. In addition to that, he worked once as a commissioner of utilities under the leadership of Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger in the past. Timothy, how often and how long must this go on before we stop it?
It's first off, my condolences to the Price family and the people of Wolf, Texas. That these kind of events bring trauma to an entire community, particularly when it involves such what appears to be such an amazing person in Jonathan Price, someone who was giving back, someone who was dedicated to health and fitness. When I was appointment secretary for Governor Schwarzenegger, one of the commissions we appointed was the Police Officer Standards Training Board. And what we need is more training on de-escalation and for police to determine if a call even warrants their intervention. Even with that said, there appears to be no reasonable grounds for Officer Lucas to discharge his firearms. And that's why I believe the case went directly to prosecution as opposed to a grand jury, as was done in Kentucky, and there are obviously a lot of issues involved there as well. But we have a cry for de-escalation. There are going to be disputes between individuals in our communities. The difference is when there is a dispute, in this case, a domestic dispute in the African American community, police often initiate violence, and that's what has transpired here.
You know, it's heartbreaking that we've gone through this since George Floyd and even before George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, and of course in the past, the names keep coming to mind. And it's just heartbreaking to keep naming the names. Yet we've got to say their names, but how long before we start changing the plan in America to actually understand our Constitution and uphold the laws to protect every citizen, particularly Black Americans?
If someone cannot see that this is systemic and that the system, the training, the deployment was designed to have the result that Mr. Price suffered, then they have a blind eye. We have a national problem of excessive force by police officers against African Americans. And there needs to be a national plan of action by the president, hopefully the next president, and the Department of Justice to begin to establish the standards as well as the incentives to employ best practices in the police service. I want to emphasize the police service to our communities.
And Timothy, as you know, the current president will not talk about situations like this in the way that needs to be discussed. He won't come out and condemn these actions, and he has yet to condemn white supremacy, full-throated condemnation of it. The new man who wants to be president, Joe Biden, is talking about redeeming America and redeeming the soul of America by getting it right racially. So we have two leaders with two messages. And the sad reality is that we still have the reality that Black men and Black women and Black children are dying disproportionately at the hands of police officers who are hired to protect and serve the community.
Well, we have an incumbent president who's doubling down on law and order, fails to recognize the realities of the type of violence that African Americans face from the police, again, who are sworn to serve. And then we have another presidential candidate who's literally seeking atonement, redemption, because Joe Biden knows that he authored the omnibus crime bill or supported the omnibus crime bill, which led to much of our mass incarceration, which is at the core of what Michelle Alexander called the new Jim Crow in her book. But be that as it may, I think that Republicans and those who are supporting Donald Trump need to ask the question, what side of history will you be on? What will you tell your grandparents, your grandchildren and your grandparents, but more importantly, your grandchildren? What will you tell them about the position that you took in this very inflective point in our history? Were you with Bull Connor? Were you with George Wallace? Because that's where we are today in this society. And I know it's tough for many Republicans to vote for a Democrat, but they need to ask themselves this question.
I appreciate you, my friend, and it's time that American history takes its boot off the necks of Black America.
Absolutely.
And redeem the past so that we can reconcile the present and move to a greater future. Timothy Allen Simon, part of the West Coast Connection, by the way. We'll be talking to him again tomorrow, post debate between Vice President Pence and Kamala Harris. We'll talk about that tomorrow. In the meantime, we extend our condolences to the family of Jonathan Price. When we return, we'll continue to talk about that. That's next. Welcome back to the program. I'm talking to my good friend, Dr. Peterson Pierre. He is one of the top dermatologists in the city of Los Angeles, African-American, doing his thing out there. But more importantly, he cares about the community. And he also cares about what's happening with regard to all of these different situations that keep cropping up. And it shows the lack of trust that is now cemented between blacks and police officers. The latest case, of course, happening in Texas with Jonathan Price trying to disrupt, peacefully disrupt a domestic dispute, gets shot by a police officer, and he's dead. Uh, Doc, it's good of you to join us. I wish it was on a better circumstance, but brothers are talking about this, and we've got to. What are your concerns when you see things like this happen?
Well, Kelly, thanks again for having me on the show. And let me start by extending my deepest sympathies to the Price family. This is a very unfortunate situation. And in addition, it's a very familiar and all too frequent situation that we find ourselves in. I look at this, and Black Lives Matter is not a movement. It's a statement of fact. We're talking about Black lives, Black human beings having the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. These were not rights given to us by our government or any other human being. These were rights given to us by our Creator. But how are we supposed to pursue happiness when the life that's required is being snuffed out by those who have sworn to protect it? This is a problem. This is a human rights issue. Unfortunately, zoned in on our race. But honestly, what other race in our nation is having this conversation about their own people? When individuals tell me there's no more racism in America, we have far too many examples to the contrary, and this needs to change. The time for talking is over. Action is all that matters.
And the action that you're looking for is police reform, and having some reform in the sense that police officers will become more sensitive to what their role really is, and to stop killing us.
Well, think about this. If Blacks make up 13% of the US population, it's a very small percentage. We cannot exact this change alone. So I think the change starts in our communities amongst all individual American citizens. Now, there are a lot of people who are moral, who look at things that are wrong and don't participate in them. And that's fine. We need people of character, folks who will step up, point out things that are wrong, and actually speak up against that. When you have morality plus character, you have integrity. It's not enough to not be racist. You must be actively anti-racist. You must step up. You must speak out against the injustice that's happening to Blacks in this country, and force the hand of our legal system to simply uphold justice for all its citizens.
Absolutely right. Now, you have children. When your children go out, what are your concerns for them? And like most Black men and women in America who are parents, we always have the talk because we want to see our children come home alive.
Absolutely. And I wonder, are there any other races in America having this talk with their kids? This is not even a concept in their minds, let alone something that they're going to act on. So for a very long time, ever since I got married and I had kids, I never leave home without hugging my wife and my kids, kissing them, and telling them that I love them. Because I understand the reality of this life is that may be the last time I see them. I may not come home, or one of them may not come home. So when my kids first started to drive, and as I was teaching them, we had to have the talk. Look, this is the situation. You're Black, you're marked. I know it's unfair. I know it's unjust, but we need to deal with the reality. If you ever get pulled over by the police, and I always tell them, do not do anything to attract attention to you. don't speed, don't do the things you know you might get pulled over for. But if that situation arises, remain calm, hands on the steering wheel at all times. Be pleasant to the police officer, even though that's the exact opposite sentiment you may be feeling at that moment. Follow all instructions. Ask the police officer if you may move to reach in for your driver's license, for your registration. Reserve the anger, the frustration, the rage until the police officer leaves. Because the most important thing I need you to do is to come home.
Absolutely. Dr. Peterson Pierre, appreciate you.
I appreciate you too,
Thank you.
Kelly. Thank you so much for having me on the show.
My pleasure. We'll be back with more after this. Welcome to the program. It gives me pleasure and a delight to introduce to you, known by many throughout the West Coast, particularly in San Francisco, Mayor London Breed. She is a native of San Francisco, raised by her grandmother in Plaza East Public Housing in the Western Addition neighborhood. We're going to talk a little bit about that, about how did she go from there to becoming the mayor of one of the greatest cities in the nation, one of the largest cities in the nation. Mayor, good of you to join us tonight.
Thank you for having me.
You know, on yesterday, the vice president, former Vice President Joe Biden, the Democrat presidential candidate, introduced something to America that he's been trying to introduce for a while, and that's unity and a sense of purpose for getting our country together again in unity rather than being divided, as we've seen all year. And he spoke from Gettysburg. I'd like to know your response to what he had to say and his message to America.
Well, someone has to be the adult in the room. And the fact is, when you are an elected official, you don't just represent the people who elected you, the people who voted for you. You represent all of the constituents that you raise your right hand and you swear to serve and protect. Every last one of them, whether they like you or not, whether they voted for you or not, it should not matter. And at the end of the day, when you are a public servant, in every sense of the word, that's what that means. You are here to serve the public in that capacity. And by doing so, as a leader, it's important to bring people together. And with everything we're dealing with, politics should not be the dividing force. What should be happening with our political leaders is unity. And that's what the vice president talked about. And that's where we are in this country. Global warming is real with what we see in the wildfires in California and how they're impacting the environment. The racial uprising, like never before, like never what has been experienced in this country is real, it's significant, and it's pushing aggressively for change. And what's happening with this global pandemic? The time for unity is now more than ever.
Absolutely. And based upon what you just stated and what the former Vice President of the United States, Joe Biden, has stated yesterday, what would you say about the President of the United States, his bout with COVID-19 and downplaying it once more?
Well, here's what I always go back to, the fact that my grandmother would say, look, you can't control what other people do. You can only control what you do. I am praying for the president, the first lady, and all the folks that have been impacted by COVID-19. I pray for their health and their safety and their well-being. And we had hoped that this would be a wake-up call for the president to be a better leader and a better messenger around the importance of the impacts of COVID on people's lives. That didn't happen. It's unfortunate, but it doesn't mean that we deviate from what we need to do as leaders, what I need to do as mayor, what the vice president needs to do in his role, and what he is doing and moving forward in. The fact is, These are very challenging times, and we can't control what the president does. We can only control what we do and how we react and how we communicate our messages and how we work together and how we protect and save lives. It's really one of the major reasons why this country is in need of new leadership.
As you know, the debate's coming up with Senator Kamala Harris and the current Vice President, Mike Pence. Do you want to give a wager, give us an idea of who you think is going to win that debate tonight?
Well, I will tell you, Kamala is a prosecutor, as people know. And we remember those Kavanaugh hearings. And let's just say she's going to do exactly what she needs to do. She's going to show the American people who she is and why she deserves a seat at the table. She's an amazing person. She's been an incredible friend and mentor, and she will be an incredible vice president for this country. And it's not just about, again, who's supporting her. It's about being the leader that the people of this entire country need at this time. I can't wait to watch it. I'm looking forward to it.
You've got your popcorn ready.
Yes.
When we return, I'll continue my conversation with Mayor London Breed, and we'll talk about how her city is dealing with the coronavirus pandemic. That's next. What have you been doing in San Francisco to help the city mitigate this coronavirus pandemic that is sweeping throughout our country? 210,000, approaching 211,000 deaths thus far, and of course, affecting people of color.
Well, I will tell you that San Francisco has been very fortunate. Any death is tragic, but our death rate is one of the lowest of any major cities in the country. I attribute that to us responding early and basically shutting our city down before declaring a state of emergency before we had even one case, and then doing a complete shutdown when it was necessary, because ultimately we wanted to save and protect life. With the disproportional, the disparities that you see in the country with the African American community are not the same disparities you see here in San Francisco, thank goodness. We have, unfortunately, a less than 6% African American population, and about 5.8% of the cases are African American. And of the 111 people that have died in San Francisco, 8 of those people were African American. So we're not seeing the disparities as it relates to the African American community, but we are seeing the disparities as it relates to the Latino community, because over half of the cases were people of Latino descent. And so the work that we've done from the very beginning is to embed a equity system in our emergency response, where we've reached out to various communities in the languages that people speak, and working with nonprofit partners and folks who are on the ground with communities to make sure people were aware of testing, PPE, social distancing, handing out masks at bus stops to people. Instead of saying, you can't ride the bus if you don't have a mask, it's like, here you go, here's a mask, can you please put that on? So taking a different approach than just expecting that everyone knows what to do. We have been boots on the ground, educating and working with community members to make sure that people are prepared, and just doing everything we can to try and keep folks safe. It is an ongoing process. Kids in the neighborhood created a video. They won a prize for it about coronavirus. It was really cool. It kind of caught on and has been circulating. And so trying to get more creative, trying to get young people involved, and making sure that people know that as tired of as the coronavirus as we are, it's not tired of us, it's not gone away. And so we have to make sure that we stay on top of it.
I've got to ask you, when it comes to the coronavirus, one of the sticking points in the Black and Brown communities, in addition to the fact that it's, actually taking so many people away from here prematurely, is the testing. Are you able to get good testing into those communities and is more help needed in that regard?
Well, definitely more help is needed, but we've come a long way. We're doing about 4,000 tests a day. And the city provides testing free, no questions asked. We make it easy for people. We've done pop-ups. We've taken testing to people's neighborhoods. The biggest challenge I think we've had is with those healthcare providers. And they have made it difficult for people who are even paying for healthcare to get tested. We do it no questions asked. So we have people who are fully insured who are using our testing system with the city because it's so simple to access. And so right now we are trying to work with the hospital council to make testing more accessible. We're not saying to test someone who's not in your healthcare system. If we could make sure that people who have health insurance actually use their own providers, we could provide more opportunities for more people to get tested. And so that is the biggest challenge that we face. But we're not turning people away. We're able to get people in and get them their results as quickly as possible. We've gone into various neighborhoods and provided some permanent locations, and especially places, as I said, where the Latino community, for the most part, has been impacted. Our contact tracing program, we're contacting at least 80% of those people who've been in contact with someone who tested positive, and half of our contact tracers speak Spanish. So the system that we set up is a good system. Could we use more? Of course, because getting tested today is no guarantee for results tomorrow. So we want to make it so that if you think you have been exposed, if you think you have symptoms, that you're able to get tested and get the results back as quickly as possible. So right now, I would say our testing capacity is decent. And of course, we could always use more.
We'll take a break, but when we return, we'll be talking to the mayor about police reform. There's also been the racial divide since the death of George Floyd. Your city marshaled in the forces to keep people at a pace of remaining calm and having unity. I spoke recently with your human rights commissioner. That was maybe a couple months ago, and had a great candid discussion with her about how you're embracing people from all backgrounds, establishing dialogue to talk about unity and the necessity for understanding this racial divide. To that extent, where do you stand in terms of understanding the human rights plight, the racial division that's gone on in this country since the death of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and the list goes on?
Well, you know, what's interesting is about being Black in this country, the sad reality is, like, we grew up with this.
Yeah.
And it's a part of, it's kind of a part of who we are, not because we want it to be, but because it's forced upon us. And what I'm seeing happen in this country for the first time ever is that people are waking up to the realities of how Black people are forced to live every single day. The fact that, you know, Black men, Black fathers, or Black grandmothers like my grandmother had to have a conversation with my brothers about what not to do when you encounter the police. That's just normal for us. But you don't hear other races having those conversations with their children. And it's because they don't deal with the same challenges we do with the police, as you can see. And so I have hope from what I'm seeing, because for the first time, it seems as though people are waking up to our reality. And most people are saying, I see this, I don't like it, and we have to change it. And I think that's really a first step. But then there are other people who are the ones who are inflicting the harm. They see it, they know it, and they don't care. And they're not going to change. And the question is, how are we going to change as a country? How are we going to change in terms of our policies? How are we going to change in terms of how we raise our children? how are we going to become a better society? There is no way that it's fair in a country like the United States that there are a lot of things that if you have a Black son, there are a lot of things you're going to have to say to that Black son that you would never have to say to any other kid if you're another race. Why is that fair that people should have to continue to live like this? And so I think that what we see in this country, is a possibility for change. But I want to be clear that change is not just about the protest. The protest fuels the changes in the policy. The protest is what fuels the decisions that get made and the investments, right? So the real work really begins right now.
Yeah.
And part of the real work we've been doing here in San Francisco is making changes as to what our police department responds to. You know, what kind of calls do they respond to? You know, how much money we're investing in the police department versus the African American community. We shifted $120 million from the police department to the African American community to invest in so many things that are necessary to deal with some of the disparities, to make it clear that it's still not okay in a place like San Francisco where less than 6% of the population is African American, yet 45% of all the, officer kind of engagements that occur are African American. We have to be deliberate about those changes, and we have to call them out, have the hard conversations, make the policy changes, but more importantly, make sure that specifically in our departments, in our police departments, that we don't make it possible or easy for people who have a problem with someone because of their race, because of their gender, because of their sexual orientation. They should not be in a position where they have the power to determine whether or not you live or die.
Coming back with more of Mayor London Breed of San Francisco after the break. Mayor, let me ask you, you talked about your public housing background. How did you get where you are today? And what would be your best advice to young African Americans, not just trying to walk into your footsteps, but to understand that possibilities do exist for them, even when it seems like it would be impossible for a little girl from the public housing section to rise to be the leader of her city?
Well, I would say that, I'm really blessed. And I think that there were a lot of people, including my grandmother, who prayed for me and who had my back. And what I tell young people all the time, never let your circumstances determine who you become in life. If your heart has a desire for something else, then go for it. And don't let anything stop you. And let me just be clear, it won't be easy. It wasn't easy for me. My grandmother, she raised me. We had welfare, we had food stamps. My mentally challenged aunt lived with us. My brother was in and out of jail. He's still in jail. Sadly, I lost a sister to a drug overdose.
Right.
There was family drama. There still is family drama.
Yeah.
But I love my family, but there still is family drama. That just doesn't go away because you do well, right? Yeah. But the fact is, I worked hard. I sacrificed. I did what I had to do because I was determined to change my life. I didn't want to be poor. I didn't want to be a drug addict. I didn't want to go to jail. I didn't want to be what I saw happen with my family and my community. And also, I didn't want it from them either. Mm-hmm. I wanted something better. I wanted to be able to take care of myself. I wanted to be able to take care of my grandmother. I wanted a better life. And yeah, it was hard. Yeah, there were the nights where I was in tears and praying and, all of the other challenges came my way. But for whatever reason, there were people every step of the way that every now and then I would get that word of encouragement. I would get that hand up. I would get that you're doing a great job, you're smart, you're capable, you should go to college. I didn't even know what college really was until I was in 10th grade. It's like, you should go to college, you should go to UC Davis. And I thought, wow, well, maybe I should. And I applied and I got in. And the fact is, times when you're in it, when you're in that world, it feels like you're never going to escape. It feels like, from my own experience, it feels like, a dead end, a hole, and there's nothing else and there's no way out. And don't let yourself get sucked into that. Don't let yourself get sucked into that. I didn't let myself get sucked into that because, as I said, the prayers, the positive energy, the good people, surrounding myself with good people. Like, there was so many, it wasn't just a one thing. There was like so many things. Someone giving me my first opportunity to work in government. In college, I cleaned toilets, I babysat, I worked at a bank. I did whatever it took not to do anything illegal for money. I did whatever it took to work hard and study because I wanted something better. I didn't know I'd be mayor. I didn't know I'd turn out to be mayor. I just felt like I'm going to be somebody. I'm going to not only work hard and get my education, but I'm going to move back to the community and I'm going to support my community because I don't want to be alone. And that's exactly what I did. That's what led me down this path. It had everything to do with being determined. It had everything to do with not giving up. It had everything to do with sacrificing. And people may have thought it was easy or saw me on the outside and thought, wow, London is making it look easy. A lot of hard work goes into being in a position like this, a lot of sacrifice.
Absolutely.
And so I want nothing but the best for my family, for my community, for my people. I want to see change, and change happens with making sure that we are determined to uplift one another for that change.
Before I let you go, I've got a secret to give you, and that is that I love San Francisco. Every time I have a chance to be in San Francisco, I love going there. I love the people. I love the atmosphere. Tell us why San Francisco is the kind of city that it's become, and why it has growth ahead of it, even in the midst of these tough times that we're now engaged in.
San Francisco is a really special place. I was born and raised here, and I visited cities all over the world. And I always feel like these are beautiful cities. But when I come home, when I come across that bridge and I see the buildings and I see the uniqueness and I see the calm and I even see the fog, there's just something about how it makes you feel. When you walk around San Francisco, the uniqueness of the architecture, the people hurrying to go nowhere, the muni buses honking their horns for someone to get out of the way. There's just something special about being in this city. And yes, like any other major city, it has its challenges.
Of course.
The food is incredible.
Oh, yeah.
The people are incredible. The atmosphere is incredible. The thing that I love the most is going and hanging out in the neighborhood I grew up in, and running into friends and just hanging out on the corner and talking, or going to Chinatown and running into a lot of the seniors there who, they don't speak English, but they're happy to see me and they know my name is Bole Da in Chinese. It just, to go from Chinatown to the Mission where our Latino community is, to the Bayview where our African American community is, to the avenues, to the beach, to the landmarks, to the Golden Gate Bridge, to the Palace of Fine Arts. We have so many unique corners. Everywhere you discover something new in the city. And even as a native, you discover something new almost every single day. I think that's what makes San Francisco a special place. Yes, we have some of the best food in the world. People come here for our Michelin star restaurants and the architectural beauty. But ultimately, it's the people and the diversity and the uniqueness and the fact that it's just an incredible place to be. And there's just, I can't imagine myself living anywhere else. Visiting, yes, but living, my heart is right here in San Francisco.
It's a good place for it to be, and that's why you're doing exactly what you do. Continue to be unapologetically you, Mayor, and thank you for being the leader that you've become. Sounds to me like you're serving to lead, and that's always the best way to lead. And thanks for the inspiration that you've given so many people throughout this country. Mayor London Breed here on the Kelly Wright Show. Appreciate you so much. God bless. Keep
Thank
the
you so
faith.
much, Kelly.
And we'll be back with more after this. Welcome back to the program. I want to thank all of the guests who appear tonight, especially Mayor London Breed of San Francisco. Enjoyed every minute of our conversation and look forward to having her on again. In the meantime, my final word is this. Hopefully by tonight's program, we've learned that we must be righted, ignited, and united to keep spreading love, freedom, and peace. Good night, everyone. Come on, all aboard.
Let me break it down for you like this.
The rhythm of love is easy to find if you're listening. The color of light isn't red, black, or white, but it's crimson. We all bleed the same. If you don't feel the groove, it's alright. Just give it time, give it time. Come on, y'all. Get on board. Mankind won't survive if our hearts beat inside a hateful rhythm. You see, love isn't bought, but comes with a price of forgiveness, and we all bleed the same. Yeah. If you don't feel it now, just wait. It's coming on, the love train. Just give it time, give it time. Get on board. That means you and you and you
on the love train.
get on board.
All creeds and colors,
Brothers
all sisters and
and
brothers
sisters,
on the love train.
get on board the love train. Everyone's invited.